our next speaker is a consulting company that is specialized in the medical technology, pharma, and biotechnology market. Planning, product development, regulatory affairs, and customized solutions are daily business to achieve the market. Prem-Sagar Tank?
Prem is fine.
Prem, okay. Prem will have a talk about the challenge of developing with the main topic design for reuse. Since we have already on stage.
Thank you, Marcus. Just wanted to thank Ultra Polymers for this excellent event. It is an honor to stand up here with such brilliant minds and present to such more brilliant minds. So as you can see here, my name is Prem from Team Consulting. I'm going to talk to you about designing for reuse and the challenges and approaches that we could adopt. So this is, of course, a bit different to the polymer discussions we've had all week rather. But you know, adding the flavor of biopolymers will lend you to more success, I think. So a quick comment on who Team Consulting is. We are one of the largest, I say largest because no one's corrected us yet, one of the largest 100% medical focused design consultancies in Europe. We focus only on medical. We've got extensive experience across drug delivery, surgical devices, critical care, regenerative medicine, medtech, you name it, we're likely to have worked on it. Worked with big pharma companies, worked with small startups, helping them get their submissions through. And I must say that the most enjoyable part of my job is working as an engineer. So I am a mechanical engineer by trade, as well as a sustainability expert. But I really enjoy working with my colleagues in design, science, applied science, human factors, testing, regulatory. We span every area of the design process. Apart from manufacture, we aren't CMOs. So we all know that there's a climate crisis. We all know that medical devices, the medical healthcare sector is really impactful on this. There's many ways to skin a cat, if you like. But why should we be designing for reuse? According to the NHS, 156,000 tons of waste is generated per year. It's about 400 loaded jumbo jets worth of waste. Within the EU, I think this very stat may well have been presented yesterday, 75% of the emissions are from scope 3, which includes not just materials, but products. And if we can encourage reuse, we can bring that down. So as we'll demonstrate today, reuse is a route towards reduced emissions, reduced waste. And it ties directly into the criteria outlined by most of the world's healthcare systems. And if not currently outlined, will be in the future. So the NHS, who have started to lead the way a little with net zero ambitions, will be publishing their outlines for product level requirements before 2028, with the hope that their supply chain suppliers will be able to conform to it. Another way to look at how waste should be designed is for end of life. Is through the waste hierarchy. Prevention is a wonderful thought, but we're all going to need some healthcare throughout our lives. So the next rung down on this chart is reuse. Of course, at the end of the day, everything we produce will end up as waste. So we do need to consider every aspect, whether it's circular economy or designing for sustainable disposal. Today, we will be talking about two healthcare sectors. Drug delivery, injectables, and surgical instruments. But what we talk about will be transferable for other sectors, depending on the application, of course. So injectables, drug delivery is a huge topic. We've decided to focus on at-home injectables or self-medicated, as our friends at Ipsomed discussed earlier. So first, let's talk about some challenges to designing for reusable injectables. The first and quite possibly the most common one is safety. There are two types of contamination that injectables will involve. First of all, you've got the drug product. Every injectable will have drug product in it. It's a risk-based, it should be a risk-based assessment whether you need to dispose of it through clinical waste or other means. But at the moment, every drug, as far as I can tell, goes down the same route. Some drugs potentially you could convince the regulators that they don't have any harm to the environment, but that's for them to decide. Secondly, contaminated needles is also a concern. If it's needle-free injection systems, then you skip that step, but essentially everything that goes inside the body needs to be disposed of through clinical waste, which ends up generally as incineration. Simplicity. So the latest wave of injectable devices are impressive. You have the two-step injectors and the like. Almost always single use. Reusable devices may require more steps, such as reloading, priming, things like that. So that is a challenge towards the reusables. The user. So you'll see a trend with these, with the talk that I'll be giving, is the user is quite key. The user must feel comfortable using the device repeatedly. They must be able to look after it, retain it, not lose it, not break it. It's a lot that is out of control of the manufacturer. There's a lot that they could design into it to encourage them to do so. At the end of the day, what does a user deem as valuable to look after and retain? And it is not a universal solution for injectables. Emergency use devices, for example, tend to be single use, of course, by their nature. But at the other end of the scale, you've got the diabetes care, where that lends themselves to a multi-use, reusable model. So now let's talk about some approaches for designing reusables. Make the disposable element as small as possible. So of course, in the diabetes sector, the pen needles are small. They are disposable per use. And then eventually you dispose of the device or the primary container. But if you go towards a pre-filled syringe system, you might need some kind of safety element to it. Does that need to be big and cumbersome? Could it be small and discreet? And going back to simplicity, there should be a balance between device complexity and the burden to the user. Should the device deal with the reloading and priming steps that I mentioned earlier? Or should that be given to the user? Would that alienate them, or would that bring them along to understand how the device works a bit better? Material selection is at the core of everything we're talking about, but also at the core of a robust reusable, as well as core engineering practices. If the user is expected to retain the device for a number of years, rigorous simulations, rigorous testing will be expected. A wide range of materials should also be considered, including reinforcements, especially for repeated loading. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a bio solution, but it does help with reuse. And as I mentioned, it is hard to get a clear picture on what are user values for something that is retainable, reusable, and sustainable. The best thing to do there is to speak to the users, bring them along on the journey, get them involved, understand their perception for what they see as valuable, and design that into the device. At the end of the day, the end users are the key stakeholders. I always go back to the reusable water bottle example. There are the plastic solutions, metal solutions. My preference is the aluminium one because I have butterfingers, I'm dropping things all the time. If I had a reusable auto-injector and I kept dropping it, I probably need to replace it a few times. So, you know, there are some mental models that you can input into your designs. So we've generated a case study on some reusables. We conducted a life cycle assessment on 4 delivery systems. Let's see if this works. Over here, we've got just a bare PFS, pre-filled syringe with a plunger rod. Then we have a single-use injector system and 2 reusable systems. First one has a fairly large safety syringe, and the second one is electromechanical with a very simple cassette with, again, PFS. Now, if you look at the carbon footprints of these in isolation, it's clear that the one with the smallest impact is your bare PFS. But you're unlikely to get that as a isolated injectable system. However, it's quite clear that the electromechanical solution seems quite over-designed, perhaps, very complex. But I must say, when it comes to reuse, it's not a very reliable graph per unit. So we'll now look at through life. So we've extrapolated this into a cumulative graph looking at 120 uses. And just to explain how it works, your initial peak here, an initial jump up, if you like, is based on your first disposable and your reusable device. And the gradient subsequent to that is the disposable only. So as you can see, the electromechanical system, as you may have expected, does not perform well after a single use, whereas almost all of the other ones perform pretty well. Now, if we follow the journey through 120 uses, the key is the size of the disposable. The single-use device performs fairly well for a few uses, maybe up to 20, depending on what you're comparing to. But if you were to go further than that and go up to just less than 100 uses, then you can see, at least in the model we've generated, the electromechanical system performs pretty well. And that is not because you have an expensive, complex device. It's because we have a very simple disposable element. And just to tie all this up, simplicity of the disposable allows room for complexity in the reusable. Great, so now we'll talk about surgical instruments. Now, this is a very different sector. It's got a very different set of challenges. We've seen all the stats. The waste produced by operations is high. We need to lower that. We need to reduce our carbon. We need to reduce our waste. Now, what are the challenges for designing reusables? First of all, perception. Infection risk is serious. If it goes wrong, there is a health risk to the patient. There's increased cost and increased utilization at the hospitals. If a surgeon is not confident with the sterility of an instrument, they may not want to use it. They may not feel comfortable using it because of the risks associated. In some cases, they may want to see them come out of the packages. And a lot of this is anecdotal that we've heard from surgeons in the industry. You may think metal devices are a good solution, but there are risks associated with metal devices. They can interfere with electrocautery procedures and some vision systems. Also, the NHS in the UK, as well as other sectors and other healthcare providers around the world, are stretched at the moment. They are struggling with cost, they're struggling with patient throughputs with increased populations. And changing protocols to reuse is going to be low on their priority list. They would rather keep to what they're used to and prioritize costs elsewhere. Also, reprocessing units and sterilization service used to be in every hospital. Decades ago, that was just how they all worked. As single-use devices became more commonplace, they started removing them in some, not in every hospital, in some, especially private hospitals, they removed them, replaced them with other technologies. And that is something that we now need to get them to reintroduce. At the moment, there are a handful of private hospitals that I'm aware of who send their devices for sterilization to another location, which of course increases your carbon impact. And finally, budgets, procurements. Hospitals organize their budgets by year. They don't look too far in the future because of all the issues we talked about earlier. You may not see savings until a year or two later, so we need to make the procurement strategies smarter to encourage hospitals to make use, to buy these reusable devices and to make it more accessible for hospitals and then help them on their net zero journeys. So how can we design our devices to do that? So design features, engineering, as always, is a good practice, but we need to consider repeated loading and wear resistance. A lot of these tools go under quite high strain, especially when you've got the entire surgeon putting their entire weight on top of it. But also you need to consider how the human tissue is cleaned from the device. You need to avoid deep crevices, hard to reach areas, and rough surfaces where you don't need them. Material selection, another mention of that today. they need to be resistant to repeated exposure of chemical elements. And that is hard. It's easy to think that biosolutions are compatible for this, but that isn't always the case. And of course, you need to prove that the mechanical properties are repeatable after several applications of sterilization. There are many standards out there. AAMI, Association of the Advancement of Mechanical Instruments, have published a few on these, which I've worked with, or my colleagues have worked with. And they provide support on design principles and testing requirements, and have some really decent documents for this. And finally, bringing this full circle to the first challenge that I posed. How can we give the regulators and the surgeons confidence that the instruments are safe for reuse? The answer is validation. You need to conduct rigorous testing to prove that the materials are still biocompatible after several cycles, and that they maintain the same mechanical properties. And then once you determine that, you put that into instructions for use, and then the hospital will take it from there and use it for as many cycles as necessary. This is costly. This will take a long time, but it's the only way to get, it is crucial for success. So we have another case study. This time we are talking about, of course, surgical instruments, but there are two types of device now. A single-use instrument set, which has its own packaging, and then two reusable sets. The sets are identical, but they go through different sterile services. The first one is a hospital-based sterile service, where they take it downstairs to sterilize and decontaminate. The other one is, as I mentioned earlier, where they take them off-site to a sterilization service. And the assumption we made here is a 60-mile journey one way for that, because that is the maximum we've seen in the UK. Unfortunately, I can't go into too much detail on what the devices exactly are due to confidentiality. And again, if you looked at the isolated carbon footprints, we've got the first use of each of these devices. So the reusables are higher because they have a different material in them, but also they include a tray for sterilization, for transport, and for handling purposes. The subsequent uses of each of these are determined by, for the single-use option, is another device, of course. But for the reusables, you have different carbon footprints for two different types of sterilization because you have transport included in the second one. And again, we've got a cumulative carbon footprint graph here. Looking at the trade-off here in the surgical world is a lot lower, or at least what we've seen with these devices that we've worked on is a lot lower than in the injectables. So in the injectables world, there's a good argument for single use because you can take it much further into a patient's usage. But I think my personal view is you need a really strong argument to convince sustainability experts like us that single use is a viable solution from a carbon footprint perspective. And as you can see, single use has a much higher footprint just after 25 uses as well. Whereas adding a bit of transport is not ideal, but you still have a much more of a saving here than you would if you were to use single use. Just to tie this up, as the infrastructures for reprocessing improve, transport for reprocessing is a low cost, carbon cost, compared with disposable instruments. Brilliant. So before we close, I just wanted to run through some key points that we've learned today. Use frequency can help decide on complexity of reusables and disposables. Long-term use can accept more complex devices, provided the disposables are nice and simple. Users are key stakeholders to ensure adherence to the device and acceptance to the sustainable principles. It is important to bring the user on the design journey and build in their preferences and habits to ensure that they do reuse the devices appropriately. Core engineering practices, robust design, and material selection, of course, making the most sensible decisions, conducting the appropriate level of validation so that the reuse is efficient. Infrastructures and mindsets need changing to accelerate carbon reductions. As the climate crisis becomes more serious, we need to shift the way we think about medical products, maybe not us, but everyone else in the industry. And the infrastructures around them need to be improved. And finally, end-of-life solutions for reusables and disposables must be considered. So we talked about disposing of the single-use parts, but the reusables, they will have a shelf life, whether it's a year, 2 years, whatever it is. Can we bring in some circularity? Can we make the incineration of them bio-friendly? Whatever it is, we need to think about that and implement the end-of-life solutions for all aspects of the device. And also the early stage, the manufacturing, the transport, the materials that go into it. We need to consider every side of the life cycle. Brilliant. Thank you for your time. If you have any thoughts, please do reach out to me. More than always happy to talk. Otherwise, let's take some questions. Thank you.
Thank you.